welcome. My name is Lloyd Borrell. I'm your host today. I'm thrilled to have as my guest Cece Doucette. Cece is a technical and professional writer by trade who, through her community work, labored tirelessly for a number of years to win grants to enable wireless and tablet devices to be introduced in her district's schools. Before discovering the dangers of wireless technology, Cece Doucette has now worked to introduce state legislation to protect children, and she is the founder of the non-profit website wirelesseducation.org. Cece Doucette, welcome to the EMF Health Summit.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. It's an honor to join you today.
It's an honor to have you on. Now, you're doing some amazing work here. I've been looking through what you've been doing. It really is very impressive. But you are a writer by trade, and I'm just thinking, well, there's a lot of great subjects there to write about. Why EMFs?
Well, I was not doing active writing when I found out that wireless technology could be biologically hazardous. I had actually been volunteering in my school district, and I ran our local education foundation. And in so doing, we kept hearing we needed to have technology for the 21st century classroom. And our school budgets couldn't afford what we were being told we needed. So I jumped in and started doing fundraising for our schools. And I personally ran 7 campaigns to get technology in. And then I went to work directly for our school district as our grant coordinator. And in that role, I ran our government grants, but I also found out about Donors Choose, which is a crowdfunding source for teachers. And I thought, well, this would be a great way to get what we need for our classrooms. So I promoted that program. And our little school district here in Ashland, Massachusetts in the USA, we received over 100 grants from Donors Choose to get things like iPads and Chromebooks and smart TVs and, smart boards. And what we were being told was all this great new technology. And then one night I was at book group, and a girlfriend of mine is an electrical engineer, and she was reading a book called Zapped. And she was starting to piece together that there could be biological harm from wireless signals. So I kind of just made a mental note of it because it comes so far out of left field when somebody first tells you about this. Yeah. And none of us really wants to believe that that's true. And it's allowed. So why would you even bother spending any time on it, right? Mm-hmm. But I filed it in the back of my mind. And then not long after, I read something in writing that also was questioning the safety of wireless technology. So that's where I began to investigate. And my first attempt was to go to our technology director for Ashland Public Schools, because he and I had worked on these campaigns together for years. And I said, what do you know about biological effects from wireless technology? And he said, I've never heard of it. Let me go check. So he comes back and says, I checked and the FCC says it's fine. But I, being a technical and professional writer by trade, I do research as well. And so I had begun to investigate on my own. And I was just simply dumbfounded at how much information is out there, readily available, that never makes it, or very seldom makes it, into mainstream media. So I started finding out things, and this was back in like 2012, 2013, that parts of Israel were taking it out of their schools. Belgium was trying to protect children. France National Library in 2008 removed Wi-Fi because of the health implications. So I was sharing all this with my schools, and I thought surely somebody brighter than me would already know about this, and they would say, yeah, we know, we've got it covered, and the kids and the staff are safe. But not one person understood that wireless technology comes with great biological risk. So it went back and forth in our district, and it was not an easy conversation to have. And I think most people who have started figuring this out have found that we have very few people who understand this. So when you bring it up, and the industry's been so effective at encouraging us to adopt all this technology, right? So when you bring it up, it's a shocker for people. And then most don't even want to know because we're so embedded with it in our lives these days. So we had a physicist come up to the podium at our school committee meeting. We had a veterinarian, we had some technologists and engineers. And if you do a cursory search, you'll find studies that show no evidence of harm. But if you go beyond that and actually look at the non-industry funded science, well, Lloyd, you'll find things like brain tumors, heart tumors, DNA damage, infertility is a huge one. It's being linked to autism, early onset Alzheimer's. Sure. And then in the short term, so many people aren't sleeping right anymore because our brain sees this light energy form as daylight. And so if we're sleeping and this is doing this to our brains all night long, it impairs our brain's ability to release melatonin in the wee hours of darkness.
Yeah.
That helps to regulate sleep, but it also helps to clean out the toxins from the day. So people simply have no idea. But when our school committee read the fine print that comes with all of our devices, I think that's when they had a legal uh-oh moment.
Yes.
So anybody who's listening today who owns an iPhone could very easily just go into settings and then remember the acronym GAL, like this gal on Lloyd's program told me how to find the fine print. So from settings, you go into general, or it could be gentlemen if there's go into general, about, legal, and at the bottom of legal, there it is, RF exposure.
Okay. Excellent.
Is radiation.
Yeah.
So
yeah, excellent. I can imagine that how it must have been. There you were working your socks off to get all this money into thinking you're doing the right thing for the kids, with the technology, and it's the way to go. And they're going to learn so much, and having these great devices and everything is going to be so much better. And then the realization that is perhaps not quite how it is.
Right, it was never safety tested.
It was never safety tested. So
we got it all to market.
Yeah, and so there's something really key here, which you said, is that nobody really understands. And I think that is worth just underlining a second here. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to organize this summit, is because it is exactly that. Nobody really understands. And let me just develop that a little bit, is that you've got engineers who understand one thing. You've got building biologists that understand another. You've got the molecular scientists, which understand another. You've got the doctors, which understand another. You've got different branches of medicine. The functional medicine doctors understand one thing. The integrative medicine doctors understand another. You've got people that have actually experienced electrical hypersensitivity. They feel it, but they don't necessarily understand the mechanisms. And so
that's it. Nobody knows to connect the dots.
Fitting all this together, that's the difficult thing, and it is so complicated. And I want to ask you about the particular dangers for children, because you talked a little bit about the dangers generally, but there are some particular dangers for children, and this is so important. This is the most important thing. So
it is, because that goes to our germline. That goes into perpetuating the human species. And when we start exposing our children to environmental toxins that can change the DNA, that means we're changing the roadmap to grow a proper human. And there have been multiple studies done in many aspects of this. I mentioned one, the issues around sleep, because so many children are going to bed with their devices under their ear or under their pillow, their iPads or their Chromebooks or their smartphones. And all night long, their poor little brains are being impacted by this microwave radiation. And nobody knows to do that. And other things that are happening is that we are seeing increases in young adults even. The American Cancer Society is reporting out a doubling and a quadrupling of colon and rectal cancers in young adults, because for how many years now, since they were kids, have they been carrying their cell phones right in their pockets or on their backside? And same thing with young women, often just put their cell phone right in their bra because it's like a pocket, right? Simple strategies could reduce that exposure so greatly. Never put an active device on your body in active mode, right? Put it in airplane mode, and that will disable the Wi-Fi antenna, the cellular antenna, the data antenna, the Bluetooth antenna, the locator antenna. And by now, most of the industry is using us as their network with hotspots. So without our understanding, we're using and parents are giving children a microwave radiation emitting device that is constantly sending and receiving microwave radiation signals to the nearest cell tower or router. And we don't need that. And the message is not no technology, it's safe technology. So in addition to the sleep issue.
Yeah, sorry, go on,
No, in addition to the sleep issue, when studies have shown that when you expose the male genitalia to microwave radiation, it mutates the DNA. So that's where we get into changing the roadmap to grow a proper human. So we are seeing more and more children being born with issues. It may be behavioral issues, it may be cognitive impairments. And the good news is that sometimes you can reverse some of that by mindfully cleansing the environment. By getting rid of the microwave toxins, by going to an organic diet and giving your body the best chance of fighting off whatever it's exposed to.
So there are solutions, and I want to come to those afterwards. But this particular aspect of what it's doing to our children is just so huge. And we've got cases. I know there's a case which I wrote about a few years ago, which I'm sure you know of. And because it's important that people, because when you talk about statistics and stuff and DNA and people don't always get that. But when you say there was a 15-year-old schoolgirl in the UK,
Jenny Fry,
who was found hanged in the woods near her home, and she was suffering from electrical hypersensitivity. Her teachers were giving her detention because she was not able to stay in the school, and she was telling everybody, she was telling her parents, she was telling her teachers. Nobody was listening, and they found her hanged in the woods, dead. 15 years old. Her parents, and I just want to say, just to be absolutely clear, her parents, who are now campaigning, they say very clearly that it was the Wi-Fi exposures which killed their daughter. Their words, not mine. The Wi-Fi exposures killed their daughter. So I'm sorry if I'm being a bit brutal in saying this, but this is the most important message.
I know, it just breaks my heart. I also know of a priest who committed suicide because of his electrohypersensitivity. And just this week, I received a copy of testimony that a pediatrician sent in to the Massachusetts legislature here, and we can talk about the bills that we have in a moment. But she was saying that she is hearing from people all over who want to end their lives because we have made such an electrosmog blanket over our society that there's nowhere that they can go. And if you're not fortunate enough to be in your own freestanding home where you can control the electromagnetic radiation around you, then where can you go? If you cannot afford to be in a freestanding home and you're in a multi-unit dwelling like a condo or an apartment building, and all your neighbors have brought in all the Wi-Fi, we basically brought cell tower energy into our homes.
Yeah, so there's a cell tower, and so you're absolutely right here talking about making that point about how it is more difficult for people that are living in multi-dwelling buildings, apartment blocks and so on. It is more difficult. And then, but in terms of what's happening to our children in schools, because there's not just the wireless problem, is there? There's all the other bits of the MFX spectrum also,
Right.
which
Right.
is 24/7. We're talking electric fields, magnetic fields, dirty electricity. And again, there's a lot of science on this, is there not too? And like most schools, school districts are totally oblivious to
They
these
are, and they've been. What I've discovered here is, as I said, I thought at every turn some public health authority or public servant would say, "Oh my gosh, we have to fix this." But what I have learned through this journey is that, at least here in America, and it may be the same or different where everybody else is, but I expected that our public servants would take leadership and be in charge. But what I've come to recognize is that they serve what the public asks them to do. So if not enough voices are speaking up about this, their time and resources are necessarily going to issues that people are speaking up about. So I think that the opportunity to educate people here is huge. But I'll tell you what, once people get educated and they take a little time to let this soak in, then they're like, oh my gosh. And that motivates people to step up and help. Even people who have never used their voice before, when they realize the gravity of what we're doing to the human genome and what our children are suffering from, I think it does empower people to say, wow, we have gone way too far on this and nobody's going to fix this but me. So how can I constructively use my voice? Let me just back up. Let me just back up to our school. So when our school district read that fine print, and they had studies over here showing no harm, they saw the BioInitiative report and the compendium of studies represented in there, which, by the way, was updated through the end of 2017. But they're not scientists or doctors. They don't know. But when they read that fine print, Ashland Public Schools became the first in the nation to even post this sign in all of our classrooms. It basically says, turn off the Wi-Fi, which means those routers and access points. Turn the Wi-Fi devices off unless you're actually using them. And always place the device a distance away from the body, because even the manufacturers in the fine print tell us that much. So I was very grateful that my school committee did this, but they're not actually doing what the sign says. I think those signs were hung simply to cover their legal backside, because they've given the children and the staff these devices. But we have not turned off the Wi-Fi, and we are still letting children use the device.
So hang on a minute. Let me just get this straight.
I know.
So you're saying you've understood, but the school hasn't understood. The people that are making the decisions at the school haven't understood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they just had these leaflets printed just to...
Well, here's what happened. Here's what happened next. A gentleman who is a father in another district in Massachusetts found my work, saw a couple of my videos of meeting presentations I've given. And he asked me if I would come and speak with his school superintendent, their school committee chairwoman, and their technology director. So he set up this nice meeting. And then their school committee invited us to come present, which we did. And this poor dad has been presenting now for over a year at every one of their school committee meetings. And they're still sitting there like deer in the headlight. So he went online to the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and he started doing a little bit of investigating. And what he discovered is that at the state level, the evaluations in our individual school districts include immersing this technology into our classrooms. So that's why our school administrators feel paralyzed, because their very jobs are on the line if they're not doing what the state is telling them to do and to put this technology into our schools. So our schools are in a catch-22. So they're waiting for higher authorities to instruct them on how to use technology safely. So when this father shared with me this email thread that he had going, he put in a comment on the website for the Department of Education and got a response back. And he had said, can you please prove to me that it's safe for me to leave my 2 children in the public school system for 13 years of their developmental lives with wireless radiation? The response he got back from the Department of Education said, this is probably more a matter for the Department of Public Health. So the father wrote to the Department of Public Health, and they said, we are working on a series of fact sheets, which I actually helped them to draft going on 2 years now ago. And so I went and I met with that gentleman at the Department of Education, and he was the nicest man you'd ever want to meet. He has 2 little girls of his own in public schools and had no idea that the sweetheart deals that they're making at the state level with the industry are actually bringing biological hazards into our schools. So he was gracious to suggest I present to the Board of Education here in Massachusetts, and I went to their next monthly meeting and I gave a presentation. And then after, I'm going to switch gears a little bit because that's as far as we've taken it with our Department of Education. But after Ashland Public Schools did this, they rolled it out during the first day back to school in 2015. And they showed that sign, and then they moved on to the next item that they were discussing that day. And when I first saw their draft of this, it said best practices for Wi-Fi safety. And what they rolled out now says best practices for mobile devices. And I was sitting there in the audience because I was still working at the time for the schools. I'm thinking, well, what just happened? They put this up there, but they never once mentioned this is two-way microwave radiation that is biologically hazardous. They never approached the safety thing. And that was their compromise because they didn't want to bring a contentious issue and divide the community. So I went to my superintendent the next day, and first I thanked him because we apparently are a rare school district that actually even investigated this. But I said, we didn't teach the teachers that this is radiation. And he said, you know, this is all I can do. I can only do what the school committee commissioned. And I said, okay. I said, can we tell the parents? Because if the parents knew, they could at least turn off all the wireless signals at home and let the kids get proper sleep so their cells can repair and regenerate and their DNA can grow properly. But he said, honestly, this is as far as I can take it right now. And I thought, okay. So I went, I had already gone to our Board of Selectmen in my town because I'm thinking, how can we tell the public, right? I had already gone to our Board of Selectmen because I submitted a grant request to get an acoustimeter, which is a like $350, $400 device that allows you to measure microwave radiation. They had rejected my application because they said, well, we don't really understand this. Come back next time. And so I came back 6 months later and resubmitted. And then they said, oh, this is probably more for our Board of Health. But I already knew in our local town, our health agent didn't know about it. He had reached up to the state level health agent who didn't know about it, but reached across to a colleague in Canada who sent back something that said, even though the World Health Organization in 2011 classified this as a 2B possible human carcinogen, it's in the same category as coffee and pickled vegetables. And I thought, oh boy, this is not good. If this is what's coming from our state level authorities, they really have not been educated on this. And of course, you may recognize the coffee and pickled vegetable. That's spin from the industry to try and downplay just how severe a toxin is if it's classified as group 2B. That's also where lead is, where thalidomide is, where, you know, all these other really big chemicals that I can't even pronounce, chloroform, exhaust, all this stuff that we have safety precautions around. That's a 2B carcinogen.
Yes.
And that's where radio frequency radiation is, which is the technical term for wireless radiation.
Correct.
So I thought, okay, we're really ignorant on this subject. And I had reached out to the state level back then and they didn't know. But, you know, as we advance and as we take the time to educate others, I believe that most people really do care and want to help. But political change takes a lot of time. So once I knew my schools weren't going to protect the kids with this, our school administrators were not going to educate the parents. Our town didn't know enough to educate the parents. I even talked to our librarian. She didn't know anything about it. And so I thought, well, let me go talk to Senator Karen Spilka. And I'd had the privilege of serving alongside her when I ran the Education Foundation. And she is just one of the most incredible public servants whom I've met on this journey. And I already knew going in that she is a woman of integrity. So I found out when her next office hours were. And I went to our little coffee shop where she was holding her meetings. And I taught her what I was learning. I measured her district director's laptop and Senator Spilka's cell phone. And Lloyd, you'll laugh because you know the various meters. When we were getting these school committee meetings going, somebody sat next to me in a meeting and he had a device in his hand. And I didn't know enough at the time. And I said, ooh, does that measure, is microwave radiation? And he said, it does. And I said, could I see it? And he was like, well, this is a very expensive piece of scientific equipment. And he wouldn't let me play with his toy, right? So out of the corner of my eye, I'm making sure what it was. And I'm writing it down. And it was a tri-field meter. And I know, right? I didn't know it. This guy brought it. I thought that was the thing. Well, it turns out he was an engineer and he didn't know what microwave radiation is. That tri-field meter, as you know, measures electrical and magnetic fields and analog radio frequency.
Yeah, so we've got, for people that are listening, your sound's going a little bit in and out, but just for people that are listening, just to clarify that, so what Cease is talking about is the old tri-field, which is like the most important one, which most people have, the most sold one, which most people have heard about, if they've heard about this, and that's called a tri-field 100XE, and it does measure the three, electric, magnetic, and radio frequency radiation, but it's not good, not sensitive on radio frequency mode, whereas the new one is, just so we don't...
oh, good. I'm glad
the new one is, there's a new one called the TF2, and that is really a proper, he says, so a proper radio frequency radiation meter, just so we don't slander anybody.
Okay. Very good, very good. So anyway, even with my tri-field meter that I had then, it sent both of their devices off the charts. And so they're looking at me like, really? And I said, yes, and nobody knows. I said, is there anything from where you are that you can think of to help get important information out to the public about using technology safely? So that was back in the fall of 2014. In the winter of 2015, Senator Spilka had put me with a lawyer in her office, and we crafted a very simple bill that would bring the right bright minds together at the state level to examine this issue and then decide what needs to happen. So I had people saying, don't get your hopes up. A bill almost never goes anywhere the first time it's introduced. And if it comes in by constituent request, that's like a red flag to the legislator, because they have literally thousands of bills they have to get through every session. And if it comes in from a constituent, maybe they don't really need to pay attention, right? So I thought, okay, but it's better than what we started with. But long story short, I was able to connect with many people who sent in testimonies, from scientists to doctors to patients to public health experts to technologists. And I think the Joint Committee on Public Health did their investigation and they reported my bill out favorably. And then I was like, okay, so what does that mean? Because I'm having to learn this whole legislative process, right? And that meant that it goes to the next committee. And my bill was bundled in with a whole bunch of others that did not pass. It got what's called sent to study, which means it's done for this session. So I said, okay, now what do we do? And they said, come back next session and Senator Spilka will assess the requests coming out of her district and decide what she wants to get involved with. And I said, okay. So this session, Senator Spilka did bring my bill back, and this time she directly sponsored it under her own name. And what I understand about our system here is a bill can either be an act that will change the law, or it can be a resolve that will form a commission to do something. Senator Spilka reintroduced my bill not as an act this time, but as a resolve. And we had, again, many people send in testimony on this bill. And it has gone from the Joint Committee on Public Health through the next two hurdles. And we will know in the next couple of weeks whether it's going to go through the Senate and the House and then get to the governor's office.
So this is an amazing story, and it's It's great that you're sharing this, because this, I'm sure, is going to help a lot of people who are in a similar situation to you, people that are trying to do good by their community, by their kids, and maybe that weren't aware of this until, you know, they tuned into the summit here about this whole EMF question, and now through listening to you, they can get some appreciation of exactly, you know, what there is to do, plus how difficult it is, because we're not saying it's easy.
I know, but you know what?
Yeah.
I'm really excited because people joining the conversation at this point in time, there are amazing tools to help you educate those around you.
There are. We're going to talk about those, but I just want to talk about somebody that I've met along my journey who's in a very similar situation in Europe, in Holland. And this gentleman is called Jan Rutger Schroeder. And he was a father of, I think he's got 5 kids. It's quite an impressive tribe. Mm-hmm. And he is an electrical engineer. He's a PhD, an electrical engineer, and he was working for working in the telecommunications industry. Mm-hmm. And he got wind about the dangers, started to experience symptoms himself, and he realized what was going on. He went in with his meter at his school, and he discovered his kids' school, and he discovered the wireless was off the charts. He started this conversation with the school, like the conversation that you had, and it was, what he was saying was falling on a lot of deaf ears. Right. And so what this gentleman actually did was he developed a new kind of router, and I say router, I know you say router, so that's what I'm talking about, a router, so a device which transmits and receives radio frequency radiation, which enables wireless devices to operate. And he developed a new form of router, which he calls a low EMF router. And I just want to insert this in this segment, because so the people that know that, because where we're both agreed, and I've had Jan Rutger on the podcast, you know, wireless is not the way to go. Wireless is not the solution, and he knows that, and I know that. But this is a 10 times reduction in EMF levels.
Excellent.
So this can be a halfway house with schools, with school districts who are just shaking their heads, and maybe where we've got this, pressure, like they're being squeezed from the bottom, which is like what you're doing, and squeezed from the top because they're getting orders from the top. They've got the money. They've got power. Not to say we people at the bottom haven't got power. It's just we need to claim our power to get into
Exactly. Exactly.
So this could be, well, this is anyway. This is developing, and I just want to put this out there. So it's 10 times less radiation. And how does it work? Very simply, there's 2 ways it works, but there's a new technology that he developed where the pulse interval is actually 10 times less than regular Wi-Fi. Because actually, regular Wi-Fi, so if you know, I'm sure because you use an acoustimeter. So if you listen to it on acoustimeter or the Cornet meters or the Tri-Field now has also got audio, then you hear that Wi-Fi signal and it sounds like a machine gun. It's going da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, the JRS Eco router, that sounds like this. Da, da, da. 10 times less. 10 times less radiation, plus very easy to change the transmit power, because that's the other thing, of course, which you're aware of, I'm sure, is that we can reduce transmit power on Wi-Fi's. It's just not easy at all, because it's like the engineers, they know how to do that, but because consumers are not asking for this information, how do we turn down the transmit power? Nobody's asking for this information, so you've got to go in the settings. You need a master's in computer science to be able to do this, and so most people are clueless about this.
Well, Lloyd, you know what?
Another solution.
There are other solutions. 2 things come to mind. I saw a public service announcement. It was either out of Cyprus or Greece, where the mom was saying, when my children are home, I never have the router on. And they just had a switch put in like a light switch that you can just turn it off and on. How simple would that be to do? And then I also understand that for a very long time, Swisscom has had a patent to put this technology into eco mode so that it would only pulsate when there is a signal in play instead of constantly pulsing to offer a handshake or to seek a handshake with a device. So there are many, many harm reduction strategies.
There are.
Some people, one thing I've come across here in the US is that at this point in time, many of us still have the option for hardwired technology, meaning that we have fiber optics running to our homes and our offices. And then we can just plug in with an Ethernet cable and hook up to our devices or buy a little adapter for an iPad or an iPhone or other types of devices. We have the option to choose hardwiring in the environments that we can control. What I've learned is in other countries, they do not have that hardwired infrastructure. So their only method of communication is through wireless transmissions. And that's where it becomes especially critical to find solutions for what we have today to reduce those emissions. But then in the end, to encourage industry to bring biologically safe mobile technology to market.
Exactly, and
I've heard that Chinese scientists...
we both agree the industry is more than capable of doing this. But before we talk more about solutions, I just want to insert this also into the conversation because we are mainly talking about wireless radiation, but there are other forms of radiation, as I mentioned earlier, and there is another bit of science here that people should be aware of. And and I'm sure you know about this as also because you're very well informed on this subject. I know it's what happened at the La Quinta school in California in 2003. Well, in the years 2000, and I've actually got the research here in front of me. And we're talking here about dirty electricity. So we're not talking about wireless. We're talking about these frequencies which are on electrical wiring and these frequencies which all homes, schools, offices have now, which are not the 60 hertz frequency. So what you're actually paying for from the utility company is this 60 hertz frequency. If you're in the US or if you're in the UK, then it's 50 hertz, but it's around 50, 60 hertz, different parts of the world, except that we now have all these other frequencies on there because we've got all these wonderful devices which are creating, these, the smarter they get, then the more of that they put on there, this electro pollution. And this study, peer-reviewed study, okay, that's important to say also, and it was the teachers in 2003 who complained they had more cancers than would be expected, okay, that's what it says here. And basically what they found was that there was a cancer cluster going on. I mean, this is a massive understatement when we're saying this. 16 school teachers in a cohort of 137, so 16 out of 137 were diagnosed with 18 cancers. And so this is like, it's not just wireless, it's not just dirty electricity, it's not just the magnetic frequencies, it's not just the electric fields, it's all of this.
All of it, yeah. It's a compounded effect.
Compounded effect.
Yeah, an important point when you talk about 18 different cancers. So we're all individuals and our bodies respond to everything differently from the person sitting next to us. So it's important to understand fully what the risks are, what the science is showing, because we have science linking this to various forms of cancers, to autism, to ADD, ADHD, to infertility is a huge one. But then when you look at what's happening inside the classroom, the behavioral issues, the nosebleeds, I've had teachers tell me that they ask their families to send in more tissues now than they've ever sent in before. And I met a school nurse at a conference one day, and I described to her the symptoms of electrical sensitivity: the nausea, the headaches, the nosebleeds, the dizziness, the inability to concentrate, the anxiety, the depression, the suicidal ideation. And she said, well, you've pretty much described my day. This is what I do as a school nurse all day now. So We're all individual, and everybody's individual body will respond differently.
It is, and there's a funny story that I just like to relate to you about that as well, which is not so funny really, but is that, and it might even be at the La Quinta School where this happened, but when I interviewed Dave Stetzer a few years ago, I remember him telling a story about a child who was at school, and the child had one of these breathers because he got asthma or something like that, breathing difficulties, and he got this asthma. And so the child was supposed to take this device in and use this thing. And they did all this. What happened was they did all this, Dave Stetzer and his team, I think it was with Dr. Sam Millam, they went in and they cleaned it out in terms of these exposures, brought it right down to safe levels with filters and so on, and perhaps looking at electrical wiring and stuff. It's not brain sciences. It's not difficult. It's very simple.
You just need to put people on the path.
They did this, and then so little Tommy, whatever his name was, he was going in for weeks, months, years with this thing. And then, obviously, in a school environment, it's the nurse that has to administer it. And what happened was, I don't know how that happened exactly, but little Tommy, he wasn't taking in that breather thing. And this was after they'd done the stuff. And there was a conversation, I can't remember exactly how it transpired, but there was a conversation between the nurse and the parent, and the parent's going, well, why aren't you giving him the breather? Why is he not using the breather? And she goes, well, he doesn't need it anymore, the breather. So since and this was not sort of, okay, we do the thing, and therefore little Tommy decides, because little Tommy obviously didn't know anything about this. It was just, they introduced these filters, they did the work, and his breathing problems just...
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that story, because it's very inspirational. And I had a woman in my town who asked me to come in with my meter, and I did. And her two little boys slept together in a big bed. And I taught her what I knew. I measured the exposures in their home. And in the children's bedroom, they had an iPad in active mode on the nightstand, because the boys like to listen to music as part of their bedtime routine. They also had a laptop on the desk, because the parents had given the older son a hand-me-down laptop, and that had the antennas on. So I got a call from her the next day, and she said, after you left, I called my husband and said, please bring home an Ethernet cable. So they hardwired that laptop and went into the device and turned off the settings for wireless, right? And then all they had to do with the iPad is put it in airplane mode, because that turns off the antennas. And she said, I have to tell you, my little guy slept through the night for the first time in his life. And I said, well, how old is he? And she said, he's 2.5. And for anybody who's had children or helped to raise young children, when those babies aren't sleeping, nobody's sleeping. And you go into this phase of exhaustion that lasts months. Well, this poor family's been in the exhausted years for 2.5 years. So I thought, wow. And that was with one education session. And then I get a call from her a couple of weeks later. And she said, I wanted to tell you that, we've cleaned up the house, so there's no wireless radiation. And we had a growth bubble in our school district. So there was a modular classroom that was brought in. So her older son was put in this modular classroom that they had not yet put the Wi-Fi routers in. And she said it's been about 2 weeks, and he had severe behavior problems. And he's like the sweetest little boy. She said, my husband and I keep looking at each other, waiting for the other shoe to drop. So, and I have more stories. My own mom, I went into my mom's and I turned off her decked cordless phone and her router that were in her little bedroom.
Yeah.
And she started sleeping through the night again. So it can be that simple. Same thing with
my
niece.
So if we can go there now, then please. So there is a lot of science. There is a lot of anecdotal evidence also. And anybody who's been following this now a little bit on the summit here can see just what a big issue this is. So let's talk about solutions, if we can, because we kind of talked about them a little bit here and there, but if we can try and pull them together, maybe, I don't know, you pick solutions for school, solutions for families.
What I'd like to do. I love the way you said, you know, policy change happens up here and here's the people here and somewhere we go in the middle. I think it was Dr. Cindy Russell who calls that the hamburger approach. You're sandwiched in between the two buns. So at the policy level here in the United States, Senator Spilka has brought forth my bill, but then a really beautiful thing happened. More bills started popping up here. So Massachusetts actually has 8 bills introduced this session, and there's actually a 9th one to address the high voltage power lines. So we are sort of leading the U.S. with these bills. I hope and pray that we will form a commission through these bills and get the right minds talking about this. Public policy deliberately takes years to happen to make sure that nobody can pull a fast one. But hopefully when they recognize just how serious this issue is, maybe we'll be able to move that along. But in the meantime, we all deserve to have a right to know that this technology was brought to market with no pre-market safety testing. And now the science is crystal clear that it's biologically hazardous. You won't hear about it in mainstream media today, though, because there was a wonderful report that came out of Harvard University called Captured Agency, how the FCC is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. That's who's running things here in the U.S., and that's who's helping to set standards for the rest of the world. Okay. So that's not going to happen fast. Yeah, at the grassroots level, though, we have some amazing resources. First of all, Lynn McLean from Australia used to be a school teacher like the gentleman you mentioned. She went to work for her government in telecom. She put her skill set together and came up with a great little book. It's very little, and it's got lots of white space and pictures and big print. It's a wonderful way for everybody to have a conversation with their children and say, here's why we might be changing things at home. So Wireless Wise Kids.
Excellent.
Last week, actually, well, on July 10th, there's a new documentary film that was released to the public. It won Best Documentary at the DC Independent Film Festival, and it's already picked up other awards along the way. It's called Generation Zapped. And it is beautifully done by producers Peter Sullivan and director Sabine El-Jamal. I don't know if I say her name right, but it's beautifully done. And it takes you through the science, what doctors are seeing, what patients are experiencing, and then what we can do to start remediating. I encourage everybody to get a copy of Generation Zapped and sit down with your loved ones and then have a conversation about what you might choose to do. And then as this comes mainstream, I have just had the most incredible privilege of working with some of the world's top minds on this. And we formed a little nonprofit. It's registered in the UK called Wireless Education. Anybody can go out to wirelesseducation.org. And literally for less than the cost of a movie ticket, because we do have overhead expenses we have to pay, less than the cost of a movie ticket, in a half an hour, you can take this little course that will teach you the science, the risks, what leading countries are already doing to protect their public, and what international medically recommended best practices for safe technology are. And it kicks out a tip sheet at the end so you can walk around your house and go, ooh, I never thought about that DECT cordless phone, or the wearable, or the baby monitor is a big one that should never be wireless near our children. So we have tools today to teach with. We've got the Wireless Wise Kids book. We've got the wirelesseducation.org courses. And in addition to the schools and families course, we've built one for the corporate workforce as well that you could take on your lunch hour. And it gives a certificate of completion as well as a tip sheet. But nobody at work should be made to wear a cordless headset.
Right. Because that's the thing, though, isn't it? Is when you're working in an office environment, big office, open plan or whatever, with maybe 10 people, maybe with 100 people or more, then you're not in control, are you? And that is the thing. So if people go to your website and they learn about the dangers. My question is how to get this, people on board, the people that are running the company, the people that are making the decisions. Do you address that?
What I would suggest is that there's a whole dark shadow on this issue in the legal arena. So in addition to looking at the fine print that comes with your mobile device that says, keep this device X amount of distance from your body or you're going to exceed the FCC limits for public radiation exposure, that's bad enough. But what has happened is that the insurance industries have recognized that radio frequency radiation is biologically hazardous, and they are turning their backs on it. They have already declared this as a leading risk, and they're putting exclusions in their insurance policies to say, if you have harm from radio frequency radiation, don't look to us to cover you. So they put exclusions in their policies, Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re. So the industry does not have coverage on this. And guess who's going to hold the bag on liability? Whoever's been giving you the devices. Our schools, that's why they came up with a sign like this. Yeah. So if you're working for somebody who has told you, you have to use a cell phone, you have to use an iPad, you have to use a wireless headset, you have to sit under this router all day, guess what? Your company could be liable. And we're already seeing lawsuits being awarded to people for damages from radio frequency radiation. I know in Grenoble, France, there was somebody who was harmed from the utility smart meter, and she was compensated for that. I think she was given like disability or what we would consider Social Security. There's been another case in Spain. I think there's been one in Italy. There's a big lawsuit here in Massachusetts at a very prestigious private school where the child became electrically sensitive, had a doctor's diagnosis, and the school refused to create a safe zone or a white zone for that child to access his education. So This is happening. The best thing to do is preventive measures. And you know what, Lloyd? One of the best things is...
Just to finish on the corporate situation, just so people understand then, really, it's a question of just beginning to understand you. It starts with you. You take the course, whatever, you buy the book, you understand, you begin to understand, or what you watch this summit, or there's lots of great resources around, but you understand, and then you go and see the human resources department, whoever it is, who makes the decisions, and you talk to them and you put it in the context which you just said of making them face up to their responsibilities, making them understand that if they don't take action, because these frequencies are biologically active, then that is very bad news financially.
Right. Actually, Lloyd, that is very true, but I would insert even one more step in there before you go to the authorities. Educate everybody around you. That was my mistake in Ashland Public Schools. I assumed as soon as somebody knew this was harming us that we would solve the problem. That does not happen. So what I would strongly urge people to do is to get a copy of Generation Zapped, watch that film, have a screening with your friends, with your loved ones, with your colleagues, get everybody on board with this, and then go talk to the authorities. Because what I discovered is one voice is very easy to sweep under the rug. But when you have a number of people, and it doesn't have to be a big number, 5-10 people maybe, that becomes momentum. And then you have an opportunity for real change. So don't think that anybody's going to just take this and do it. You have to do it yourself and get those around you educated. Once you get, have everybody go take the wireless education course, right? Anybody can do that. And then you are level set with the facts. And then in the course, it links you off to the scientific studies and stuff. So you can go in empowered rather than saying, hey, can somebody else take care of this for us? Now you can make sure it happens.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we're running out of time, unfortunately. But where can you just remind us where people can find out more about what you do? Because I know you've got several websites that you're involved with.
If you would go out to wirelesseducation.org, that's probably the quickest way to come up to speed. You can take a half-hour course. If you would like to follow my work that I'm doing here in Massachusetts, on the EMF or electromagnetic field and radio frequency radiation bills, you can go and search for my name. It's Cece, C-E-C-E, Doucette, D-O-U-C-E-T-T-E, and then just type in understanding EMFs, electromagnetic fields. I've got a very simple research repository built that people are more than welcome to come and investigate, start your own investigation, launch from there. But I built pages for municipal leaders because the folks who are signing on to bring the smart grid into our communities have no idea that it's going to make us potentially very sick. So I have a page to help educate your local municipal leaders. I have a page for physicists and engineers because they're making these products not even knowing that what they're producing could make somebody sick down the line. And then I have pages for cancer, infertility, Wi-Fi in school, children. So that's my research repository. And I also have an Understanding EMFs Facebook page, but admittedly, I don't have a lot of time for social media. So take it with me.
This is a surprise. It's been fantastic, honestly. You're a lovely lady. I love what you're doing. I think you're like the role model for somebody who's doing this, because what I will say to people watching is it's not by being, you'll notice something about Cece. She's very nicely spoken. She's got a very nice way about her. She's not aggressive, but she knows her facts. She knows her stuff. She's done her homework, and she's in her truth. And this is the thing, what I encourage you all to be in your truth, is that when you know that what you're doing is the right thing, then everything becomes possible, because you can be up against tremendous odds. But when you're in your truth, that's where your power is. And this is where, for all of us, where our power is. So, Cece Doucette, thank you so much. Doucette is from the French, I guess, because douce means very sweet, means soft and sweet. That's what you are. So well done. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for those words. All right.
And thank you, everyone who's been watching today, who's part of this movement. My name is Lloyd Borrell. Thank you so much. See you in the next session. Take care. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.